The air in the old Victorian house hung thick with the scent of ash and the ghost of smoke. It had been 3 months since the fire, 3 months since Sam had been taken, and Claire still couldn't breathe easily within its walls. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind through the broken window panes, sounded like a mournful sigh. Before, the house had vibrated with life, with Sam's boisterous laughter echoing through the halls as they played tag or built elaborate Lego castles in the living room. Now, a chilling silence had settled, heavier than any tomb. Their parents moved like shadows, their faces etched with a grief too profound for words. But Claire felt something more than just sadness. It was a hollow ache, a gnawing emptiness that threatened to swallow her whole. Sam was more than just her brother, he was her confidant, her partner in crime, the other half of her soul. They had shared a secret language of inside jokes and unspoken understandings. He knew her better than anyone else in the world, and she, him. They were inseparable, 2 peas in a pod, their bond forged in childhood adventures and whispered secrets under the covers late at night. She remembered the day they found the old treehouse in the woods behind their house. It was overgrown with ivy and looked like something out of a fairy tale. Sam, ever the brave one, climbed up first, his eyes shining with excitement. He helped her up, and together they claimed it as their own secret hideaway. They spent hours there, reading books, telling stories, and dreaming of all the amazing things they would do when they grew up. Now, the treehouse stood empty, a silent monument to a future that would never be. Claire often found herself wandering through the woods, drawn to that spot, hoping to catch a glimpse of him, to hear his laughter again. But all she found was the rustling of leaves and the whisper of the wind, mocking her with their emptiness. The fire had been fast, merciless. She remembered the frantic shouts, the blinding smoke, the searing heat. She had been pulled out of the house, coughing and disoriented, by a firefighter. She had screamed for Sam, but no one could hear her over the roar of the flames. By the time they got the fire under control, it was too late. The official report said it was an electrical fire, started in the basement. They said Sam had been overcome by smoke inhalation. They said there was nothing anyone could have done. But Claire knew better. She felt it in her bones, a deep, unsettling certainty that something wasn't right. She couldn't explain it, but she knew Sam wouldn't just give up. He was a fighter, always ready to take on any challenge. He wouldn't just lie down and let the smoke take him. And then, one night, she heard it. A faint whisper, carried on the draft from the basement. A voice she knew better than her own. Claire. Her blood ran cold. She stood frozen in the hallway, her heart pounding in her chest. It couldn't be. It was impossible. Claire, help me. The voice was weak, raspy, but unmistakably Sam's. It was coming from the basement. The place where he died. The voice, raspy and faint, echoed in her ears long after the silence returned. Claire stood frozen, every nerve ending screaming at her to run, to deny what she had heard. But a part of her, a small, stubborn voice within her heart, urged her to listen. To believe. She told herself it was just her imagination, a trick of the grief that clung to her like a shroud. She had been so close to Sam, their connection so profound, that perhaps her mind was simply conjuring his voice out of thin air. It was a coping mechanism, a desperate attempt to hold on to the last vestiges of their shared life. But deep down, she knew it was more than that. The voice had a quality, a resonance that felt undeniably real. It wasn't just a memory, it was a presence. The next night, Claire lay awake in her bed, her heart pounding in anticipation. The house was quiet, save for the gentle creaks and groans that came with its age. As the clock struck midnight, she held her breath, straining her ears. And then she heard it again. Claire. This time, the voice was slightly stronger, clearer. It sent shivers down her spine. She sat up in bed, her body trembling. Claire, help me, it's cold. Tears welled up in her eyes. It was definitely Sam. There was no mistaking it. But how? How could he be calling to her from beyond the grave? She crept out of bed, her bare feet silent on the wooden floor. She made her way to the hallway, her heart pounding with each step. The basement door loomed before her, a dark and forbidding portal. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the doorknob. Fear warred with a desperate longing to hear his voice again, to offer him comfort, to help him if she could. Taking a deep breath, she turned the knob and slowly opened the door. A blast of cold, damp air rushed out, carrying with it the faint scent of smoke and something else, something acrid and metallic, like blood. She flicked on the light switch, and the basement was illuminated in a dim, flickering glow. Dust motes danced in the air, and shadows stretched across the cluttered space. Old boxes, forgotten toys, and discarded furniture were piled haphazardly against the walls. "Sam," she whispered, her voice trembling. Silence. She took a tentative step down the creaking stairs. The air grew colder, the scent of smoke stronger. "Sam, are you there?" she called out again, her voice gaining a little more strength. Then, she heard it. A faint rustling sound, coming from the far corner of the basement. She squinted, trying to make out what it was. "Claire." The voice whispered, closer this time. "Help me. I'm scared." She moved towards the sound, her heart pounding in her chest. As she rounded a stack of old boxes, she saw it. A faint, shimmering light, hovering in the air. And as she got closer, she could make out a figure, translucent and shimmering, huddled in the corner. It was Sam. His eyes were wide with fear, his face pale and gaunt. He looked like a ghost, a shadow of the boy she once knew. "Sam," she cried out, rushing towards him. "What happened? What's going on?" He looked at her, his eyes filled with a desperate plea. "Claire. I'm trapped." "Trapped?" Claire whispered, her voice barely audible above the pounding of her heart. "Trapped where, Sam? What do you mean?" The ghostly figure of her brother shimmered, his form flickering like a candle flame in the wind. He reached out a translucent hand towards her, his eyes pleading. "The basement. I can't get out, the door, it's locked." Claire's mind raced. The basement door wasn't locked. She had just opened it herself. But then she remembered the fire, the chaos, the frantic shouts. Could the door have been locked then? Could Sam have been trapped in the basement while the house burned around him? A wave of guilt washed over her, so intense it almost knocked her off her feet. Had she abandoned him? Had she failed to save him when he needed her most? But the firemen. She stammered. "They searched the house, they would have found you." Sam shook his head, his eyes filled with sorrow. "No, they didn't. I was, in the corner, behind the boxes, they didn't see me." His voice faded, growing weaker with each word. His form flickered even more violently, as if he was struggling to maintain his presence. "Claire, you have to help me. I can't stay here, it's cold, and dark, and I'm scared." Tears streamed down Claire's face. She reached out to touch him, but her hand passed right through his ghostly form. "I'll help you, Sam," she promised, her voice choked with emotion. "I'll do whatever it takes to get you out of here." But how? How could she help a ghost? How could she unlock a door that existed only in the past? She looked around the basement, her eyes scanning the cluttered space. There had to be something, some clue, some explanation for what was happening. "What do you need, Sam?" she asked. "What can I do?" Sam hesitated, his eyes darting around the room as if he was searching for something. The camcorder," he whispered. "The old one, in the attic, find it, it will show you." The camcorder? What could a camcorder possibly have to do with anything? But she knew she had to trust him. Sam had never lied to her before, and she couldn't imagine he would start now, even in death. "Okay, Sam," she said. I'll find the camcorder. I'll bring it here. Just stay with me. She turned to leave the basement, but as she reached the stairs, she heard Sam's voice again, even weaker than before. Claire, hurry. I don't have much time. She didn't need to be told twice. She raced up the stairs and out of the basement, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear, determination, and a desperate hope that she could somehow save her brother, even if it was only his spirit, from the torment he was enduring. As she ran through the house, she could hear her parents stirring in their bedroom. They would be worried if they found her up at this hour, but she couldn't risk telling them what was happening. They wouldn't believe her. They would think she was losing her mind. She had to do this alone. For Sam. She made her way to the attic, her footsteps echoing in the silent house. The attic was even colder and dustier than the basement, filled with forgotten memories and discarded treasures. She rummaged through old boxes, her hands growing numb with cold, searching for the camcorder. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, she found it. An old, bulky camcorder, covered in dust and cobwebs. She grabbed it and raced back down the stairs, her heart pounding with anticipation. She had no idea what the camcorder would reveal, but she knew it was her only hope. The only way to understand what had happened to Sam, and the only way to help him find peace. As she descended back into the basement, she clutched the camcorder tightly in her hand, a lifeline in the darkness. Back in the basement, the ghostly image of Sam flickered weakly in the corner. Claire knelt beside him, the camcorder clutched in her hand. He seemed even more faded than before, his voice barely a whisper. I found it, Sam, she said, her voice trembling. I have the camcorder. But, what do I do with it? Sam gestured weakly towards a nearby outlet. Plug it in, there's a tape inside, watch it. Claire fumbled with the camcorder, her hands shaking so badly she could barely insert the plug into the outlet. Finally, she managed to connect it, and the camcorder whirred to life. A small screen flickered on, displaying static. She pressed the play button, and the static cleared, replaced by a grainy image. It was a recording of Sam, taken sometime before the fire. He was younger, full of life, his eyes shining with mischief. Hey, guys. It's Sam. Just testing out Dad's old camcorder, he said, grinning at the camera. Claire's being a grumpy pants and doesn't want to be in the video, but I'll get her later. Claire smiled sadly at the image of her brother, so full of life and energy. It was hard to believe he was gone. The recording continued, showing Sam playing in the backyard, building a fort, and riding his bike. It was a normal, happy childhood, captured on tape. But then, the recording changed. The image flickered, and the sound became distorted. The camera was now pointed at the basement door. Okay, so Dad said I shouldn't be down here, but I'm being a rebel, Sam said, his voice muffled. He's always so worried about us getting hurt. He says the basement is dangerous, but it's just dusty and boring. He fiddled with the camera, pointing it around the basement. It was the same basement Claire was in now, but without the ghostly presence of her brother. Then, suddenly, the image shook violently, and the sound of crackling fire filled the air. Smoke began to billow into the frame. What's going on? Sam cried out, his voice filled with panic. Is that fire? Dad! He ran to the basement door and tried to open it, but it was locked. He rattled the doorknob, his face contorted with fear. Dad! Help! I'm locked in, he screamed, his voice muffled by the door. Dad! Please! I can't breathe. The camera shook violently as Sam pounded on the door, his cries growing more desperate. The smoke grew thicker, obscuring the image. Then, the recording cut off abruptly, leaving only static. Claire stared at the screen, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew now. She knew what had happened to Sam. He hadn't died from smoke inhalation. He had been trapped. The basement door had been locked. And her father, her father had locked it. A wave of anger surged through her, so intense it threatened to consume her. How could he? How could he have left Sam to die? But then, she remembered the fire, the chaos, the fear. Her father had been trying to protect them. He had been trying to contain the fire, to keep them safe. He had made a mistake. A terrible, tragic mistake. But it was still a mistake that had cost Sam his life. She looked at the ghostly image of her brother, his eyes filled with pain and confusion. He deserved justice. He deserved to know the truth. I saw it, Sam, she said, her voice choked with tears. I know what happened. Dad, he locked the door. He didn't mean to, but he did. Sam's ghostly form flickered, his expression unreadable. He didn't mean to, he whispered. No, Claire said. He was trying to protect us. He made a mistake. But would Sam understand? Could he forgive their father for what he had done? And could Claire ever forgive him either? The ghostly image of Sam remained in the corner, his expression unchanging. Claire stared at him, her mind reeling from the revelation. Her father, the man she had always looked up to, the man who had always been her protector, had inadvertently caused Sam's death. Could she ever forgive him? Could she ever look at him the same way again? I need to talk to him, Claire said, her voice barely a whisper. I need to know why he did it. Sam's form flickered, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and understanding. He didn't mean to. Claire, don't be angry. But he locked the door, Sam. Claire cried out, her voice rising in anger. He left you to die. How can I not be angry? He was scared, he was trying to protect us. Sam said, his voice growing weaker. He loves us. Claire knew he was right. Her father loved them. He had always put their needs before his own. But that didn't excuse what had happened. She stood up, her legs shaky. I have to go talk to him, Sam. I'll be back. I promise. She turned and left the basement, leaving Sam's ghostly image flickering in the corner. As she walked through the house, she could feel her anger building with each step. She found her parents in the living room, sitting in silence, their faces etched with grief. They looked up as she entered, their eyes filled with a mixture of hope and apprehension. Claire, honey, what's wrong? Her mother asked, her voice filled with concern. You look pale. Claire took a deep breath, trying to compose herself. I need to talk to Dad. Alone. Her mother exchanged a worried glance with her father, but she nodded and stood up. I'll go make some tea, she said, and quietly left the room. Claire turned to her father, her heart pounding in her chest. He looked at her expectantly, his eyes filled with love and concern. Dad, she said, her voice trembling. I know what happened to Sam. Her father's face paled, and he leaned forward in his chair. What do you mean, honey? Claire took another deep breath, trying to steady her voice. I found the camcorder, Dad. The old one, in the attic. I watched the tape. Her father's eyes widened in horror, and he reached out to grab her hand. Claire. I can explain. I saw it, Dad, Claire said, pulling her hand away. I saw Sam in the basement. I saw you lock the door. Her father's face crumpled, and he began to sob. Oh, Claire. I didn't mean to. I swear. I didn't mean to. But you did it, Dad. Claire cried out, her voice filled with anger. You locked him in. You left him to die. I was trying to protect you, her father sobbed. The fire was spreading so fast. I was afraid it would reach the stairs. I just wanted to keep you safe. But what about Sam? Claire cried out. Didn't you care about him? Of course, I cared about him, her father sobbed. I loved him just as much as I love you. It was an accident, Claire. A terrible, tragic accident. Claire stared at her father, her heart filled with a mixture of anger, sadness, and confusion. He was telling the truth. She knew he was. But that didn't make it any easier to forgive him. I don't know what to say, Dad, she said, her voice trembling. I don't know if I can ever forgive you. Her father looked at her, his eyes filled with despair. I understand, Claire, he said. I don't expect you to. But please, please believe me when I say that I never meant for any of this to happen. Claire turned and walked out of the room, leaving her father sobbing in his chair. She didn't know what to do. She didn't know where to go. All she knew was that she couldn't stay in that house any longer. Not with the ghost of her brother haunting the basement, and the weight of her father's guilt hanging over her head. Leaving her father in the living room, Claire felt a profound sense of emptiness. The house, once a sanctuary filled with love and laughter, now felt like a prison, haunted by secrets and unspoken grief. She needed to escape, to clear her head and try to make sense of everything that had happened. But where could she go? She couldn't stay with her parents, not after what she had learned. And she couldn't leave Sam alone in the basement. With a sigh, she turned and walked back towards the basement door. As she descended the stairs, the familiar scent of smoke and dampness filled her nostrils. The ghostly image of Sam still flickered in the corner, his expression unchanged. I talked to him, Sam, Claire said, her voice weary. He said it was an accident. He said he was trying to protect us. Sam's form flickered, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and understanding. I know. Claire, he loves us. But it doesn't change what happened, Sam, Claire said, her voice choked with emotion. You're still gone. And it's all his fault. Sam didn't respond, his ghostly form growing fainter. Claire knelt beside him, her heart filled with sorrow. What do I do now, Sam? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. I don't know what to do. Sam's form flickered one last time, and then he vanished completely. Claire was left alone in the basement, surrounded by darkness and silence. She sat there for a long time, her mind racing, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. She had discovered the truth about Sam's death, but it had only brought her more pain and confusion. She stood up, her legs stiff and sore. She needed to do something, anything, to distract herself from the pain. She decided to clean the basement, to try to clear away some of the clutter and dust that had accumulated over the years. As she sorted through old boxes and discarded furniture, she came across a pile of old photographs. She sat down on the floor and began to look through them, smiling sadly at the images of her family, happy and carefree. There were pictures of her and Sam playing in the backyard, building snowmen in the winter, and celebrating birthdays. There were pictures of her parents, young and in love, their faces full of hope for the future. As she looked through the photographs, she realized that her family had once been happy, whole. But the fire had taken everything away, leaving behind only ashes and memories. Suddenly, she came across a photograph that caught her eye. It was a picture of her and Sam, standing in front of the house, smiling for the camera. But in the background, she noticed something she had never seen before. In the reflection of a window, she could see a figure standing in the basement doorway. It was her father, his face obscured by shadow. And in his hand, she could see something glinting in the light. A key. Claire stared at the photograph, her heart pounding in her chest. Her father had been standing in the basement doorway, holding a key. The key to the basement door. He had known that Sam was trapped in the basement. He had known that he was going to die. And he had done nothing to save him. A wave of anger washed over Claire, so intense it almost knocked her off her feet. Her father hadn't made a mistake. He had deliberately locked Sam in the basement, knowing that he would die. But why? Why would he do such a thing? Claire stood up, her hands trembling with rage. She needed to confront her father again. She needed to know the truth. She raced out of the basement and back into the living room, where she found her father still sitting in his chair, his face buried in his hands. "You lied to me!" Claire screamed, her voice filled with fury. "You knew Sam was trapped in the basement. You had the key. You could have saved him." Her father looked up at her, his eyes filled with terror. "Claire. I can explain." "Explain what?" Claire cried out. "Explain why you left Sam to die. Explain why you murdered your own son." Her father shook his head, tears streaming down his face. "No, it's not like that. I swear." "Then tell me the truth." Claire screamed. "Tell me why you did it." Her father hesitated, his face contorted with pain. Finally, he took a deep breath and began to speak. "It was an accident, Claire," he said, his voice trembling. "But, it was also, a choice." "A choice?" Claire repeated, her voice laced with disbelief. "What kind of choice? What are you talking about?" Her father looked up at her, his eyes filled with a pain so deep it seemed to consume him. He hesitated for a moment, as if struggling to find the right words. I knew about the fire before it started," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Claire stared at him, her mind reeling. "What? How could you know?" Her father took a deep breath, his hands trembling. I had been having dreams. Visions. Of a fire in the basement. I didn't know when it would happen, but I knew it was coming." Claire's mind raced. Her father had always been a bit eccentric, prone to strange hunches and premonitions. But she had never taken him seriously. Now, she wasn't so sure. "So you knew there was going to be a fire, and you didn't do anything to prevent it?" she asked, her voice filled with disbelief. "I tried," her father cried out. "I tried to fix the wiring in the basement, but I couldn't find the source of the problem. I even considered telling everyone to leave the house, but I was afraid they would think I was crazy." "So you just waited for the fire to happen?" Claire asked, her voice trembling with rage. "No," her father cried out. "I was trying to protect you. When the fire started, I knew I had to act fast. I ran to the basement to try to put it out, but it was already too late. The flames were spreading too quickly." "And that's when you locked the door?" Claire asked, her voice cold. Her father nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I saw Sam in the basement, trying to escape. But the fire was blocking the stairs. I knew that if I opened the door, the fire would spread to the rest of the house, and everyone would die." "So you decided to sacrifice Sam?" Claire asked, her voice filled with horror. "No," her father cried out. "It wasn't like that. I didn't want him to die. But I had to make a choice. Save Sam, and risk everyone else in the house. Or lock the door, and save you and your mother." Claire stared at her father, her heart filled with a mixture of anger, disgust, and a strange, twisted sense of understanding. He had made a terrible choice, but he had done it out of love. "And the key?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Why did you have the key?" Her father hesitated, his face contorted with pain. I was going to go back for him," he said, his voice trembling. "Once I had gotten you and your mother to safety, I was going to unlock the door and try to rescue Sam." "But you didn't," Claire said, her voice cold. "I couldn't," her father sobbed. "The fire was too intense. By the time I got you and your mother out of the house, it was too late. The basement was engulfed in flames." Claire stared at her father, her mind racing. He had made a terrible choice, but he had done it out of love. Could she ever forgive him for that? She didn't know. All she knew was that she couldn't stay in that house any longer. Not with the ghost of her brother haunting the basement, and the weight of her father's guilt hanging over her head. "I'm leaving," she said, her voice cold and flat. I can't stay here anymore. Her father looked up at her, his eyes filled with despair. Where will you go? He asked. I don't know, Claire said. But anywhere is better than here. She turned and walked out of the house, leaving her father sobbing in his chair. She didn't look back. She knew that if she did, she might never leave. As she walked down the street, she could feel the weight of her grief pressing down on her, threatening to crush her. But she refused to let it. She would survive. She would find a way to move on. But she knew that she would never forget Sam. And she knew that she would never forgive her father for what he had done. As she walked away, she could hear Sam's voice calling to her from the basement, faint but unmistakable. Claire, help me. But this time, she didn't stop. She kept walking, her eyes fixed on the horizon. She knew that Sam would always be with her, in her heart and in her memories. But she also knew that she couldn't let his death destroy her life. She had to keep moving forward, no matter how painful it might be. She had to find a way to live, even in the face of such profound loss. The small town of Havenwood blurred behind Claire as she drove, the setting sun painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, a cruel mockery of the darkness that had consumed her life. Each mile took her further from the house, from her parents, and from the memory of Sam's trapped and terrified voice. She didn't know where she was going. She only knew she had to escape the suffocating weight of the past. She drove aimlessly, letting the road guide her, seeking some semblance of peace in the anonymity of the open highway. As darkness fell, she pulled into a small, roadside motel, its neon sign flickering wearily against the night. The room was dingy and smelled of stale cigarettes, but it was a haven, a temporary escape from the storm raging within her. She lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the camcorder footage in her mind. Sam's laughter, his playful banter, his sudden, heart-wrenching cries for help as the smoke filled the basement. The image of his small hand pounding desperately on the locked door, a futile attempt to escape his fiery prison. The guilt gnawed at her, sharper than ever. Had she been a better sister, would she have sensed his danger? Would she have somehow found a way to save him? She knew it was irrational, that she couldn't have possibly known what was happening. But the guilt persisted, a constant reminder of her powerlessness, her failure to protect the one person who had always meant the world to her. Sleep offered no respite. Nightmares plagued her, vivid and terrifying replays of the fire, of Sam's desperate pleas for help, of her father's anguished face. She woke up screaming, her body drenched in sweat, the echoes of Sam's voice ringing in her ears. The next morning, she continued her aimless journey, driving further and further away from Havenwood, hoping to outrun the memories that haunted her. She stopped at diners, gas stations, and roadside attractions, trying to fill the void within her with distractions, but nothing seemed to work. Everywhere she went, she saw reminders of Sam. A young boy with his mischievous grin, a playful game of tag, a shared laugh between siblings. Each encounter was a fresh wound, a painful reminder of what she had lost. She tried to call her mother, but she couldn't bring herself to speak. What could she say? How could she explain the turmoil that was tearing her apart? She hung up the phone, tears streaming down her face. She was alone, adrift in a sea of grief and guilt, with no one to turn to. As she drove, she noticed a small, roadside antique shop. On a whim, she pulled over and went inside, hoping to find some forgotten treasure that might offer her a moment of solace. The shop was cluttered with dusty relics and forgotten memories. Old photographs, antique toys, and vintage clothing filled the shelves, each object whispering a story of a life lived and lost. As she wandered through the aisles, she came across a small, wooden music box. She picked it up and opened it, and a delicate melody filled the air. It was a song she recognized, a lullaby her mother used to sing to her and Sam when they were children. The melody transported her back to a time of innocence and joy, a time before the fire, before the secrets, before the grief. For a moment, she felt a flicker of hope, a brief respite from the darkness that had consumed her life. But then, she heard it again. A faint whisper, carried on the breeze. Claire. Her blood ran cold. She froze, her hand. Frozen, her hand still clutching the music box. The melody, once a source of comfort, now seemed to mock her, a reminder of the innocence she had lost. Claire. The voice whispered again, closer this time, clearer. It was Sam. She knew it, deep in her soul. It was his voice, his familiar tone, his desperate plea for help. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the sound, but it was no use. The voice was inside her head, a constant, unrelenting reminder of her guilt and her grief. "Leave me alone, Sam," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Please, just leave me alone." But the voice didn't stop. It continued to call her name, a haunting echo of the past. She opened her eyes and looked around the antique shop, her heart pounding in her chest. No one else seemed to notice anything unusual. The shop owner was busy dusting a shelf, oblivious to the turmoil that was raging within her. She stumbled out of the shop, gasping for air. She needed to get away, to escape the voice that was tormenting her. She ran to her car and sped away, leaving the antique shop behind. She drove for hours, her mind racing, her heart aching. As darkness fell, she pulled into another motel, even more run down than the last. The room was small and cramped, with peeling wallpaper and a musty smell. But she didn't care. She just needed a place to rest, to escape the voice, even if only for a few hours. She lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind filled with images of Sam. His laughter, his tears, his desperate cries for help. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the memories, but they were too powerful. They flooded her mind, overwhelming her with guilt and grief. "Why, Sam," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Why are you doing this to me?" She knew that he wasn't trying to hurt her. He was just trying to reach out to her, to connect with her, to find peace. But she couldn't help him. She was too broken, too damaged. She couldn't forgive her father, and she couldn't forgive herself. She was trapped in a cycle of grief and guilt, with no way out. Suddenly, she heard a noise outside her door. A faint scratching sound, like someone was trying to get in. Her heart pounded in her chest. She sat up in bed, her body trembling. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice barely a whisper. The scratching sound stopped. Silence. Then, she heard it again. "Claire." The voice whispered, right outside her door. "Help me." She knew it was Sam. She couldn't ignore him any longer. She had to confront him, to tell him the truth, to beg him for forgiveness. She got out of bed and walked slowly towards the door, her heart pounding with each step. She reached out and touched the doorknob, her hand trembling. Taking a deep breath, she turned the knob and slowly opened the door. Standing in the hallway, bathed in the dim light of the motel, was a small, shadowy figure. It was Sam. His ghostly form flickered, his eyes filled with pain and sorrow. "Claire." He whispered, his voice barely audible. "Why, did he leave me?" Claire stared at her brother, her heart breaking. She had to tell him the truth. She had to explain why their father had locked him in the basement. "He was scared, Sam," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "He thought he was protecting us. He made a terrible choice, but he didn't mean to hurt you. He thought he was doing what was best for everyone." Sam's ghostly form flickered, his eyes filled with a mixture of pain and confusion. "But, he left me, to die." "I know, Sam," Claire said, her voice choked with tears. "It was a terrible choice. But he loves you. He always has." Sam stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then, he slowly shook his head. "No." He whispered. "If he loved me, he wouldn't have left me." His form began to fade, growing fainter with each word. "Sam, Wait! Claire cried out, reaching towards him. Don't go. Please, don't leave me alone. But it was too late. Sam's ghostly form vanished completely, leaving Claire standing alone in the hallway, her heart breaking. She stumbled back into the motel room, collapsing on the bed, sobbing uncontrollably. She had lost everything. Her brother, her family, her peace of mind. She was alone, adrift in a sea of grief and guilt, with no hope of rescue. She lay there for hours, her body racked with sobs, her mind filled with despair. As the sun began to rise, casting a pale light through the window, she knew that she couldn't stay there any longer. She had to do something. She had to find a way to move on, to escape the darkness that had consumed her life. She got out of bed and walked to the window, staring out at the world outside. The sky was a pale shade of gray, the air thick with humidity. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew that she couldn't let Sam's death define her life. She had to find a way to honor his memory, to live a life that would make him proud. She packed her bag, her hands trembling. She didn't know where she was going, but she knew that she couldn't stay in that motel room any longer. She had to keep moving forward, no matter how painful it might be. As she walked out of the motel room, she heard Sam's voice again, faint but unmistakable. Claire. She stopped for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew that she couldn't escape his voice, that it would always be with her, a constant reminder of her loss. But she also knew that she couldn't let it control her life. She had to find a way to live with it, to accept it, to use it as a source of strength. She took another deep breath and continued walking, her eyes fixed on the horizon. She didn't know what the future held, but she was determined to face it, no matter how difficult it might be. She had lost everything, but she still had herself. And she knew that as long as she kept moving forward, she would eventually find her way back to the light. She got in her car and drove away, leaving the motel behind. As she drove, she could hear Sam's voice calling to her, faint but persistent. But this time, she didn't try to ignore it. She listened to it, letting it guide her, letting it remind her of the love that they had shared. She knew that Sam would always be with her, in her heart and in her memories. And she knew that as long as she kept moving forward, she would eventually find a way to make peace with the past. She drove on. Her journey stretching out before her like an unwritten story. She eventually settled in a small coastal town, drawn to the rhythmic crashing of the waves and the salty tang of the sea air. She found a small apartment overlooking the ocean, its windows offering a panoramic view of the endless horizon. She got a job at a local bookstore, surrounded by stories of love, loss, and redemption. She immersed herself in the world of literature, hoping to find some answers, some guidance, some solace in the words of others. She made friends with her co-workers, a group of kind and quirky individuals who accepted her without question, who didn't pry into her past, who simply offered her friendship and support. She started taking long walks on the beach, letting the waves wash away her worries, letting the sea breeze clear her mind. She found a sense of peace in the solitude of the ocean, a connection to something larger than herself. But even in this idyllic setting, Sam's voice persisted. It was fainter now, more distant, but it was always there, a constant reminder of her loss and her guilt. Sometimes, she would hear it in the whisper of the wind, sometimes in the crashing of the waves, sometimes in the rustling of the leaves. It was always there, a part of her life. She learned to live with it, to accept it, to embrace it. She knew that she could never truly escape Sam's voice, that it would always be with her, a constant reminder of the love that they had shared. But she also knew that she couldn't let it control her life. She had to find a way to move on, to live a life that would make him proud. She started volunteering at a local animal shelter, caring for abandoned and neglected animals. She found a sense of purpose in helping others, in giving back to the community. She started painting again, something she had abandoned after Sam's death. She found a new way to express her emotions, to channel her grief and her guilt into something beautiful and meaningful. She started writing in a journal, documenting her thoughts and feelings, trying to make sense of her experiences. She found a sense of clarity in putting her thoughts into words, in exploring her emotions on paper. She started to heal, slowly but surely. She knew that she would never fully recover from the loss of Sam, but she was learning to live with it, to accept it, to find joy in the midst of sorrow. One day, she received a letter from her mother. It was a simple, heartfelt message, expressing her love and her concern. "Your father and I miss you terribly," her mother wrote. "We know that what happened was awful, and we understand why you needed to leave. But we want you to know that we love you, and we always will. We hope that someday, you will be able to forgive us. And we hope that someday, you will be able to come home." Claire read the letter, tears streaming down her face. She knew that she couldn't go back to Havenwood, not yet. But she also knew that she couldn't stay away forever. She had to find a way to forgive her father, to make peace with the past, to reconnect with her family. She wrote a letter back to her mother, expressing her love and her gratitude. She didn't mention the fire, or the secrets, or the guilt. She simply told her that she was doing well, that she was happy, and that she was thinking of them. She sealed the letter and mailed it, feeling a sense of relief wash over her. She had taken a small step towards healing, towards forgiveness, towards reconciliation. As she walked back to her apartment, she heard Sam's voice again, faint but unmistakable. "Claire." She stopped for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew that his voice would always be with her, a constant reminder of her loss. But this time, there was something different about it. It wasn't a plea for help, or a cry of sorrow. It was a whisper of love, a gentle reminder of the bond that they had shared. Claire smiled, tears